This week, we welcome Chase Snyder, Senior Product Marketing Manager at ExtraHop, to discuss why cybersecurity is a team sport. In the Leadership and Communication section, CISO salaries balloon, likely spurred by demand, 4 steps to being an authentic leader, keeping your team motivated when the company is struggling, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Is your organization finding it difficult to achieve compliance and scale its security posture? As G2's highest rated cloud compliance software, Drata streamlines your SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, and many more security frameworks, and provides continuous 24-hour control monitoring so you can focus on scaling securely. Drata is also the only compliance automation platform with a private tenant database. That's like having your cake and securing it too. Listeners of Business Security Weekly get 10% off Drata by visiting securityweekly.com/Drata. That's DRATA. Cloud security compliance doesn't have to be complicated. Whether your business is migrating to the cloud or a seasoned cloud service provider, BAR Advisory can help you simplify security and compliance frameworks, including SOC, ISO, and HITRUST. As an extension of your team, BAR specialists will put your people first and empower them with the knowledge and tools needed to stay secure and compliant at every stage of your business growth. Learn how BAR can help your company build trust with consumers and become cyber resilient at securityweekly.com/BAR Advisory. That's BARR Advisory. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 274, recorded August 22nd, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, back after a customer on-site meeting. Yes, you heard it right. I was actually on-site at a customer meeting last week. It was so good to be on-site. Joining me remotely are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, how's it going, Matt?
Good. I think you and Jason held down the fort for me last week, I think. Also joining me remotely today is Tyler Robinson. Tyler, welcome.
Matt, good to see you, buddy. Happy Monday, right?
Yeah, happy Monday. A few weeks in a row. I got the Idaho connection with Mr. Lee Neely. Welcome, Lee.
Good to be here. Good to see everybody, and even though we're not in person.
Yes. Every time a group of people get together in person, it usually leads to a COVID spreader event. So yeah. It's all right. We can do this for a little while longer.
Yeah, so many people's weak immune systems are so weak these days. I'm hoping we get back to where we were. We all had to worry about was when the kids went to school and brought back everything from the other people they hadn't seen all summer.
Exactly right.
They don't make anybody hike uphill both ways, Lee. I get it.
Yeah, in the snow. 20 inches of snow.
Barefoot. Uphill.
Security Weekly listeners save 20% on InfoSec World 2022 passes. InfoSec World will be held September 27th through the 29th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW and use the code ISW22-SecWeek20 to secure your spot now. Also, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. This segment is sponsored by ExtraHop. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. As a senior product marketing manager at ExtraHop, Chase strives to help security operations teams maintaining the upper hand against rapidly evolving threat actors. For the past 7 years, Chase's work has focused on helping enterprises achieve their security goals and eliminate business risk using network intelligence, network detection and response, and alignment with security frameworks. Chase, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Pumped to get into it with this awesome panel.
Yes. So we're going to talk about why cybersecurity is a team sport. Now, usually on Mondays when Jason's here, we talk about the latest about football because it's preseason football right now. College is getting ready to start. And I think about a college football team for a second. You got offense, you've got defense, you have special teams. I need roughly 24 to 28 key player positions, right? When I apply that to cybersecurity for a second, we have offense, we have defense, we might have some special teams, but yet CISOs have like 60, 70 different tools. It seems too many to me.
Yeah, honestly, if you had 24, 28 key positions to fill, you'd be super lucky. Probably really effective security team if that was the number of positions you were trying to fill and you had the best for each one.
Right, exactly right. So when we think about cybersecurity strategy and building out a team, and it's a team sport, there's a couple examples. We're going to talk the XDR example because I think it's a really interesting one, and how we have all these different solutions that talk about XDR. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there's a lot of variables in that mix. The second one I want to talk about a little bit is zero trust, because zero trust has been all the rage as well. If you went to RSA conference, which I think most of us did, you had XDR and zero trust all over the place. But both of those are team sport type activities. They are not single vendor or they are multi-vendor, but it's about bringing those solutions together. So let's start with the XDR example because I think it kind of hits Extra Hop's wheelhouse. I actually both do, but let's start there first. What are some of the issues and challenges around what is XDR and what do I need to do to be successful with XDR?
Sure. Great question. Who knows, man? I mean, you ask any analyst firm, any vendor, any practitioner, you get a different answer for that. I mean, I think ultimately the goal of it is stop the bad guys, but that's clearly not detailed enough. I think I like to think of XDR as sort of an evolution or an outgrowth of the SOC triad idea, where it's like, okay, there are fundamental data sources and sources of telemetry that are going to give you more leverage or more value in your security operations, particularly for detecting and responding to threats, but also for prevention, investigation, forensics. And in the SOC triad framework, that's like endpoint data, network data, and activity logs. And you can frame that as the data sources or as the tool types, NDR, EDR, and SIM. Those three form a really strong foundation, but obviously, like you said, most folks have like 50, 60, 70 different tools. Some of them are duplicative and are looking at those same exact sources of telemetry for different purposes. And some of them are, different types of data. Like you get email security platforms that are looking at different type of data. So you have a lot of data sources, and frequently those come with a different interface, and the analyst has to look at those different interfaces, and you just get in a current normal situation, security analysts have way too many different things to look at and are having to manually correlate the data across those sources to develop any sort of like usable, actionable insight. So I think the goal with XDR is to reduce the friction between those fundamental data sources. And there are various ways that folks are trying to do that, reduce the amount of pivoting between consoles, reduce the amount of sort of manual munging together of different data types to, reduce the amount of friction and sort of labor that the SOC analysts are having to do because, as we also know, many security teams are wildly understaffed and under-resourced. So I think the overall goal of XDR is kind of do a better job at security operations, or like have the vendors do a better job of enabling effective security operations that we know is a super under-resourced field. But how you get there is wildly challenging. Yeah, go for it, Tyler.
Do you end up with visibility gaps? Do you feel like there ends up being visibility gaps where you're parsing together disparate data sources, and or is there any advantage to leveraging that many multi-products, pulling it into one source? Is there a better way to do that where you're using a single product and not having to leverage something like an XDR or SOAR in order to kind of correlate that and eliminate some of those gaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's sort of two fundamental approaches to how folks are doing XDR. Some companies are trying to build, buy, put together their own single product that, they claim will fulfill all of the requirements of the security team. And some folks are focusing really hardcore on their one core competency, building one product really well and saying, buy whatever other tool you want or buy the best one for each job. And we will integrate with that thing to reduce that sort of operational friction of, tabbing between different consoles, swivel chair effect, etc. And I think the idea of the single vendor, sock in a box, like one tool for XDR, has this super appealing simplicity where it's like, oh, I only go through one buying and procurement cycle. I only have to analyze one vendor. It's probably cheaper. But I think very frequently that causes folks not to level the amount of scrutiny that they should at each of the different sort of use cases of the product, where it's like, okay, if this does all the things, I can just buy it for one low price. That sounds so good, often too good to be true. And I think frequently you'll get stuff that is like certain of the data sources or certain of the tools, like the company that builds the sock in a box or the single vendor XDR still has to pull in those different sources of telemetry. We like to say, I work at XDR Hub, we do network detection response. We like to say you can't do XDR without network data. You have to have network data in there. And so if a company that started out in some other realm and built an awesome product in something other than NDR, then is going to offer an XDR product, they got to get network in there somehow. And they're either going to buy another company that does it and incorporate it, bolt it on, or they're going to build it. But the kind of R&D org you need to build a best of breed network solution it's hard to hire that. So it's like they're probably going to build something that isn't necessarily best of breed. And it sort of depends on your needs as an organization. But I think that's the challenge you run into is it's still going to be a conglomeration of different tools. And you really have to look closely to see whether those actually work together, which parts were built, which parts are bought, and how are they integrated together. You're just looking at that within a single vendor rather than across vendors.
Do you see this as an effective? Oh, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you really look at that, if you dissect that a bit, though, there's only a very small number of companies that can actually afford to buy best of breed. And I'm going to throw out the cost of the product, right? Let's not even look at the cost of the product. Let's look at the cost of integration, the cost of support, the cost of training, the cost of management, the cost of, just the time to bring all those sources of data together. And so, when I look at that, best of breed is wonderful, right? But as a CISO sitting in the seat, like managing infrastructure and, people day to day, I got to figure like, how can I get to the 80, 85% use case and get good enough where I can actually get something done? Otherwise, I never get anything implemented. I can't get any visibility. And I'm always fighting against, there's a next new best XDR, EDR, QDR, PDR. It doesn't matter what type of DR it is, throw 26, 27 letters at it. Like I'm stuck there trying to figure out how to put it all together, right? As a guy sitting in the seat as a practitioner. And so I don't know. I just see consolidation and bringing things together and trying to figure out how do I answer like the big use case problems and leave the edge cases to the people who can throw the bodies and time and money at it. Thoughts?
Hey, Ben, do you calculate in the added value or your return on investment for things like alert fatigue, right? Where you're getting a high fidelity single source and visibility where you can actually tune that down. Is that a consideration that you look at when you're evaluating it for your team as an added benefit, or like you said, the integration and actually the implementation of getting all those sources into a high fidelity state? Like, is that more of a concern?
I think the second is more of a concern, right? How do I get that holistic, actionable thing, right? So if I have 100 really high fidelity alerts that I can't triage because I can't get to them all, versus I've got 100 alerts that I can actually triage and get to because they're consolidated. I mean, it's the actionable information is much more actionable, to put it simply. I mean, I have to be able to do something with that. And then, what I'm pressing all my vendors for is how do I take that information and not turn it into the technical delivery of information, but that actionable, reportable analytics I can figure out, is the program getting better or worse, right? Am I doing something about it?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's those kind of outcomes, obviously, that you have to prioritize. But something that you said about the one vendor versus like the cost of integrating and implementing all the different things is that I feel like a lot of organizations already have at least some best of breed. You know what I mean? You got something in-house already. So if you're going to buy a new thing, if it has any overlapping parts, are you just going to like not use those and be like, I just paid for an XDR thing, but only need like one or two of the things that are in there, and I like my other stuff. There's that challenge of like, for any place that has a security practice already built up and a bunch of tools, incremental progress probably doesn't mean buying an all-in-one solution. Incremental progress probably means figuring out your gaps and saying, okay, I want the best thing to solve that gap, and then buying one that'll plug in with the rest of the thing and play nice with the rest of the things that you've already got. Does that accurately reflect your experience?
So I would, look, I would say so there's different types of companies, right? There's the big companies that are buying best of breed, and they've got this large stack, and they figured out how to operationalize it. The other end of that spectrum is you've got small, mid-sized companies, and even some big companies that don't have hardly anything, right? Even today, it's surprising, but they're on a build program, or they're doing a total transformation and trying to restructure. And so they're looking to figure out, how do I get economy of scale? How do I make all this work together, right? How do I get something that's digestible? And then you've got people in the middle, which is, I think, the spot you're talking about, where they've got a couple best of breed products and they've got some gaps or holes, and they're trying to figure out where they go. It's been my experience from my own personal background and peers that I've talked to, that what we're trying to look at is, okay, I've made strategic investments in vendor X and vendor Y. They both kind of cross over. Who am I going with as my bet in the future, right? And I'm looking to get that stack down, to standardize that, right? And it's more valuable to me for companies that, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. So I'm thinking of two companies, right? I'm thinking of one company that built out holistically, and they started to grow their space, right? I'm thinking of another company that peanut buttered, right? And has a bunch of stuff, but they're very broad. The problem with the very broad is, like, it's not all brought together very well. And so I'm going to invest in a company that's figured out how to move out tangentially to what they've done and encompass more stuff, but do it very well, and kind of plug those gaps that sit on the periphery, than I am going to be to get a company that does just 18 things and they do none of them well, right? But I'm not looking for the guy that only does one vertical and he does it super well, because typically the cost of that is super high and the utilization cost to me is super low. So I'm trying to figure out how to get, best of breed is always the thing we aim for, but I think it's like, what if I think of best of breed, it may mean something different. Best of breed means, what's the 80% use case that I can actually get stuff done with, right? Best of breed for a Visa, Bank of America, a city, that's probably a different thing. That's a different definition of best of breed. So I think your perspective really matters in this case. I don't know, Tyler, Lee, like, do you guys see it? Are you hearing the same thing from people you talk to? Call me a liar here. Tell me that I'm off track.
No,
That's the way I see
it. You've got to leverage what you can actually use. And one of the hardest things is when you see a gap and the vendor says, don't worry, it's in the next version. And how many it's in the next versions before you say, look, I got to go with another vendor who actually has that problem solved.
Or you end up with shelfware because they say they have something, or it doesn't actually do exactly what you need. So you end up having to purchase it and you can't consume it.
And I'll even, I'll take this one step much at a higher level, right? Which is something I'm struggling with right now. Like, I've seen vendors come in and they offer me a ton of value. And when I was at Nokia, I implemented a solution that maybe cost me $15,000 for some, tracking of some intellectual property. Super inexpensive, but super high value for me, right? Like multi-millions of dollars of value. And then I'll have another company that comes in and wants me to pitch me a solution that's $650,000. And you're like, yeah, I'm just not seeing the relative value there to everything else I'm buying. But you may be best in breed in that slice you do, but you're not bringing me value. And so that's another thing I just struggle with. And I hate to bring it back to cost, but eventually, it's whether it's people, time, or money, they're all cost factors. I really struggle with these vendors that come in and try to pitch me on a solution, and they're not thinking like, I'm charging $500,000, but your value is only 100,000. Like, how does that resonate, right? And that's where, I can't tell you the number of vendors that I've walked out on because the value prop doesn't work out. I look at other solutions where I'm getting a ton of value, and I say that's worthwhile. And I'd all day rather spend that money, because it's a limited slice, the resources and the time. I'd rather throw it at vendors that come and are reasonable about it and actually give me business value back, versus the esoteric use case of I can solve this really weird problem that the NSA is concerned about it, but I'm not.
But that's because you're a good CISO, right? Like a lot of CISOs are at that point where they're not going to get fired because they bring in, the next gen Cisco. No one's going to get fired for bringing in the best of breed. Like, hey, we had this product here. Now we've reduced our risk liability on paper, maybe not our risk profile or our threat profile, but we're not going to get fired or laid off because we were doing it, in the Gartner quadrant that made sense.
That is such a killer point about the incentives involved for every person. The incentives for the CISO, the individuals, the practitioners for any given thing, being the one who can really use any given product that comes in, like can really elevate your career. And so that, skews how people prioritize stuff. And then as an overall organization, all those kinds of incentives come into play. And for vendors too, it's like vendor incentives, like what are the incentives to integrate nicely with other products versus what are the incentives to sort of, build a walled garden or build a product, a single sock in a box type of thing. And it's hard to suss all that out. I feel like those the vendors that come at you with a $650,000 product with only $150,000 in value, they gotta build a better business value calculator. That's a that's a thing we can do.
It's hard, right? Because I think a lot of people throw around these. Goes back to that every acronym that we hear that's a new acronym, and people go, "Oh, that's going to solve your problem." And I'm not saying that you can have an expensive solution and it really be worth it if you could put the time, money, and effort to really operationalize it right. But I think the challenge, and this gets back to Tyler's thing about like, thanks for throwing out, I'm a good CISO, which depending upon your perspective, you may question. But what I find, the people who I think are really good CISOs are the people that take time to understand the business and figure out what's the biggest bang for your buck right now, right? It doesn't have to be super expensive. It can be something trivial that you do to like, how do you push out, and this isn't a CISO thing, I have responsibility for IT, but how do you push out a signature for everybody that's consistent across the org, right? That doesn't cost a lot of money. It doesn't really affect a lot of things, but the branding and the image and the perception and the user uptake of how they think about the program then is a positive one, right? So it gets you a lot of energy to then take on that advanced use case of like, how do I roll out XDR and get it effectively deployed, right? How do I make that impact into production to change hearts and minds? So I think that's the case I would argue is, how do you make the most effective change in the shortest amount of time? And then that bubble will grow. So 6 years from now, I might really be concerned about that esoteric use case, but I can't do it now. And I think a lot of people they sit in a swivel chair, like just, focusing on the next big thing every 5 minutes, and it's not helpful to the org, right? So, don't take this wrong. I do think that there is value in a lot of these solutions. My question is, what's the relative value to the org that you're sitting in the seat, and how does that apply correctly, right? And most people aren't doing that. I think they're following the market, and the market often leads you into bad territory.
I mean, if this was working, we wouldn't have all the breaches across the market and all these massive quadrants that, we're throwing massive amounts of money at. Like, you can put as much money as you want, I'll still find a way in. So obviously that's not the answer.
Chase, when we were going through the conversation, one of the things we talked about was, how do you approach this, right? And you said, first you have to know what you want. It ties to Ben's point, right?
Yeah.
Based on where you are, you have to know what you want. Because if you don't know what you want, you don't have that clear vision, how are any of these other pieces going to align? Whether I go single provider with these extra products, or whether it's like pure best in breed, it's clear, having a clear vision of what you want.
Yeah, you got to have a plan. And with the rapid evolution of the threat landscape, sort of increasing just scale and sophistication of attacks, I think it can be tough, especially for organizations that are under resourced or are don't have the staff for it, to identify even what the best, like Ben, you're saying you got to figure out the relative value of like the next use case, like what's your biggest bang for buck right now. And I think fundamentally organizations a lot just don't have the capacity to do that very effectively, and they're trusting vendors to do it. And some vendors will do that in good faith, and some vendors will do it in such a way that will prioritize them. And then there's frameworks, MITRE and NIST, and a lot of useful stuff to do that. but it's a kind of overwhelming problem. I'd be curious how you approach that. How do you identify your best bang for buck?
Well, I think it's really understanding your use case. You got to understand your own company first, right? You have to understand what your business is. You have to understand what the problems you have are and how you're going to try to solve those. And I would say, it's not even just down to the vendor; it's down to the sales guy, right? So you can have a great vendor that means very well and does a great job, but sales, depending upon the sales guy you get or the territory you're working with, like you can have a very different experience as to what you get that's potentially pushed on you or sold a bad bill of goods versus they really understand what you're trying to accomplish. And as a result, they're either saying, hey, this probably isn't right for you, or yeah, this will solve these use cases, but not those. And if you have a good understanding of that, then I think you can implement correctly. I think it's in how you understand what you're trying to aim for, what your plan is, right? What's the strategy and the value you're bringing to the business, and understanding the maturity model that you're in, right? To your point, I think you can have great tools that bring in a lot of data, but if the operators don't know what to do with the data when it comes in, again, what's the value from that, right? So you've got to figure out where you are on that journey to align with the right vendor, the right use case, and the right delivery model.
I think we have a lot of the same challenges with zero trust, right? I said earlier when I opened this, right? I think we see the same issues there. What was that segment 4 weeks ago or so? Zero trust is not a SKU. And it's not even 5 SKUs, right? It's not an application SKU, a data SKU, a network SKU, an endpoint SKU, and an application SKU, right? It's more complex than that. And it comes into the same part of this conversation. What is the clear vision? Who are the vendors that potentially fill the zero trust architecture and then implement? Because we got the same issues there, just like we do in XDR with all these vendors out talking about zero trust, but they're only a sliver of the zero trust architecture.
That's right. Yeah. And Chase, I'm sure you've seen this, right? Like in Tyler and Lee, how many vendors got into zero trust because somebody sat in a room and said, zero trust is really hot. Like we got to figure out how we match to zero trust. Like they don't really do a lot about zero trust, but they're now entering in that market because they see it as a play. And so again, as a vendor, what's the value proposition you're bringing to me? How do you reduce my footprint, improve my security, and how do you do it at a level that's cost effective, right? And cost effective doesn't mean you have to be cheap. It just means you have to match what the value I get out of that product is.
Oh, 100%. That same introspection, sort of knowing yourself that organizations have to do when they're buying technology applies to vendors too. And I think the experience that a lot of salespeople are having and vendors are having is there's this sort of flywheel, the hype cycle. Okay, there's a hype that develops around a term, and so they start getting asked about it. And if they say that's not us, that's not what we do, then it ends the conversation. And ending a conversation is a huge no if you're selling. And so figuring out how do I have that conversation? How do I thread that needle? And that comes back to the sort of integration versus build a whole solution thing of saying, how do I have that conversation? I can say, well, that's not what we build. Our core competency is this, but we have these close partnerships with these other solutions, or we've got these incredible APIs and common information models that'll help you plug into the other stuff that you need for that. It's not what we do, but when you start to do that as a framework, when you start to build out zero trust for yourself, we're here for it. We can plug into it and we can add value to that anywhere along the journey. But not having anything to say about one of these keywords that's popping off, such as XDR or zero trust, that's just not an experience that sellers are willing to have. They're demanding messaging around it,
I think they have to, right? So if I think that there's one thing that I gravitate, I get asked all the time, how do I get you to take a phone call? Right? How do I get you to have the conversation with me about selling? Trust, right? Like you've got to build trust, right? And so the thing that destroys that the most is if you come in and tell me something that it turns out not to be true. If you come in and transparently say, hey, that's just not what we do, man, I'm going to take your call at your next 3 companies, right? When you call me, because I know you're going to tell me the truth. So I think building up that trust model, and that's why in my title, it was so important to me when I thought about how, because we're a vendor too, everybody's a vendor, right? When I go out and we talk to customers or we get engaged, I want it to be about transparency and trust. And I want to build that where I'm going to tell you exactly the way it is. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to leave stuff out. But there's sometimes I'm going to have to tell you, yeah, that's just not something fundamentally that like we've got solved right now, or that we do, or yeah, we got a gap there, but here's our plan to fix it. But I think aligning that, and that ties back into your point of, you don't have to solve it, but if you have the ecosystem, or even if you point me and say, hey, that's not us, man, but if you go talk to company Y, that's a great solution. And I think they're doing a really good thing in this space, and come back and talk to me when it meets your needs. I'll take your call next time. Right. And so I think aligning that ecosystem to, it's not just security. We talked about this on the pre-call, right? It's 5G, right? It's what does that mean? It's how did cellular get sold, right? Which is a space we play in. Like that's emergent, but there's been a lot of misnomers in the market and carriers saying that they do one thing, but they're really not all the way there yet, right? It's more the marketing hype of the technology versus the technology being fully deployed. So I think it's across markets, but it's something we need to figure out how to address. But I think you're spot on, Chase, when you say that it needs to be it's a village, right? It takes a bunch of different people to figure out how to put this together, but figure out how you're going to play in that market versus how you're going to try to isolate yourself and be a standalone in that market.
That's being a smart customer, though, right? Like, really, we need to make sure that our executives above us are educated with the proper knowledge of fundamentally what are we trying to do. You say zero trust, like that's not an appliance, that's not a box, like this is a roadmap we're trying to do. There's a lot of pillars to doing that correctly. So now getting us as a customer, when we're going to vendors, getting past the salespeople and all the buzzwords and really fundamentally understanding what we're trying to do, what technology and gap we're trying to address with what mitigating, compensating controls, and then asking for that appropriately with these smart questions. That's an educated consumer. That's what we have to be as a business or within leadership.
Yep. Chase, the other one, transparency was key. The other one, I think, a little bit is simplicity, right? If you are going to build a strategy where it's about integrating data, it has to be simple. We got a lot of legacy technology out there. Some of it's harder to integrate than others. The simplicity of integration is also going to allow us to get to these models, right? Either an integrated XDR or an integrated zero trust solution. I think transparency and simplicity are a couple things I took away from our discussion prepping for this interview today as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. I think, and I would love to hear the perspective from everyone on this call on it, honestly. But when it comes to building trust, the perception around integrations and around plugging tools together and having them work nicely is that it has a lot of implementation cost, a lot of operational challenges that companies just don't want to deal with. And to me, it seems like a way for vendors to build trust up front and sort of lay the groundwork for a positive relationship is to take on that burden for themselves. So if you look at a company that's going, they have built a best of breed approach in some vertical, and then they're integrating with other tools in the other sort of parts of the SOC triad or what have you, and they do a really good job of building that integration. They're like, make it as seamless as possible. So it's just like, okay, plug in API keys, check the boxes. They bring to bear a lot of expertise around how the data should be integrated and how it should be displayed and stuff, so that the buyer doesn't have to have professional engineers and API folks on deck just to keep the integration rolling. I'm curious, Ben, Tyler, Lee, does that build trust for you? If you see a vendor that's like genuinely super easy to integrate with the stuff that you already have, do you think, okay, these folks are putting in the work to show me that they mean business when it comes to integration?
Well,
or
that only goes so far. You've also they actually will pull it off too. I mean, and I know there's a certain amount in the sales cycle, a certain amount of hype, looking at what's coming down the pike. So, get them excited. But that's why I come back to that next version it works thing. Is it's got to bloody work. But you build these relationships; these aren't one and done. You don't want to come away feeling slimy. But those that can deliver, and those that can tell me about what they're doing without playing buzzword bingo, as Ben says, in terms I can relate to my mission as a business, they're going to do a whole lot better than somebody who just doesn't really understand what their product does to make my business better or can deliver.
I wouldn't say it's trust at that level yet. I would say it shows maturity, and it shows that they're secure with inside of their product space and what their product is capable of delivering with. And so the ability to utilize other people's integrations and do that well shows that level of maturity where you're actually going to get a long-term relationship because they know where they're going and they have to have those integrations in order to make their product successful.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, Tyler. It's not so much the trust, but it's the maturity, right? And show me that it's easy. Show me that it's simple. Show me that you're taking workload off my teams, because I want my guys to focus on the higher level problems that are relative to my business. I don't want them to figure out. That's why everybody moved to the cloud. You don't want to figure out how to deploy a solution, maintain it, upgrade it. Like, I don't want that. Like, that should be something you're doing because you're the vendor. What I want is, how do I now solve a problem to my business with your technology? And so that maturity and that ecosystem of working with other vendors and partners, that goes a long way to build the relationship.
Love that. Reading the signal of like how a company approaches those integrations and partnerships is a signal of that company's own maturity and how much value you think you can get out of them. That's a great read.
And it's a perfect place to end this segment. Chase, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me, Matt, Tyler, Ben, Lee. It's been a privilege. Thanks, guys.
To learn how to draft your cybersecurity team or to learn more about ExtraHop, please visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.